Okay, moving right along to item 11A. This is a public hearing seeking input regarding a waiver from the State Board of Education. This is regarding the, was it CVRA? Am I saying that right? I believe we have, Mr. Freeman, are you coming up to speak to us?
Thank you. Good evening, Board. I'm Harold Freeman, as you know, but for those in the audience, I'm an attorney that's working with the school district from the law firm of Lozano Smith and helping you address the California Voting Rights Act and the Board's process to move towards trustee area elections. As the Board knows, in response to a demand made on it under the California Voting Rights Act by a prospective litigant against the district, the Board has started the process of moving towards trustee area elections. What that means is that right now you are elected at an at-large basis. All members of the district, all voters, get to vote for all open board positions. Under a trustee area model, you move to a situation where the district is essentially divided into by-trustee areas, and those who live in those particular trustee areas vote for a trustee from their particular area. And at a prior meeting, on September 20th, this board adopted a resolution of intention to move forward with the process of moving to those trustee elections. And some of what will be happening tonight, I know later in the meeting, relates to that as well. One of the choices that you get to make along the way is unique to school districts. So the California Voting Rights Act and the move from general elections to trustee elections applies to cities and school districts and special districts and counties, but you are also governed by the education code. And so if, for example, a city, as your city has recently been going through, moves to trustee areas through this process, once they make their decision, the process is generally done. That is the end of the process. For school districts, you're governed by the education code, and when you take certain actions affecting your board, that includes things like increasing the number of members on the board, decreasing the number of members on the board, or changing methods of election, including moving to trustee areas, you are required to make the decision, but then it goes from you, once you've decided on a map that you're proposing, to the County Committee on School District Organization, and that in your county is the County Board of Education, sits in that role. And if the County Board of Education approves your map, it is then under the Education Code put forth to the voters. So the electorate gets to vote on it. And I want to emphasize that's different, again, than special districts, cities, counties. This is unique to school districts, community college districts, county offices of education. It's a different type of approach. What ends up happening as a result is, unlike a city or a county, you have to take this extra step, and the district has to pay for the cost of that election. And complicating matters further, the next upcoming election is so close you will not be done with your process. You would have to likely go through a special election process for that, which has a considerable cost to the school district, and that is general fund monies we're talking about. So in recognition of that, what most school districts in the state, the vast majority, I can't say all of them, but I can say very nearly all of them who've been through this process have done, is to seek a waiver from the State Board of Education of the election requirement. So if you go through that, what would end up happening is you submit your waiver to the state. If it's granted, you still will go through your map process. You'll decide on the trustee areas. That will go to the county committee, but when the county committee takes action, that's the final step. It doesn't then go to the electorate, and you save the cost of the election. In the history of the CVRA in California, we're not aware of the State Board of Education ever denying one of these requests for a waiver, and we know that the number is well over 100 school districts who've sought and received those waivers. So essentially, if you decide to do this, it's very, very likely that the state board will approve it. And really, it's being put forward to you tonight for consideration as a cost savings measure to avoid that election cost primarily. One thing you have to do to seek a waiver, there's a series of different steps you have to go through. You have to consult with your unions. You have to get public input. And that's the purpose of tonight's public hearing, is to allow the public to comment on their thoughts about the board seeking the waiver. That's just a prerequisite. The state board will require you to show that you've had the hearing. So that's really the purpose of the public hearing tonight. And if there's questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, I think if the board's okay with it, I'd like to see if there's any public comment, and then we'll take questions from the board. Is that?
Mine's not really a question, it's just a clarification.
Okay, sure.
I just wanted to clarify, because you said there was a short timeline. I've actually been asked whether it's this coming election, and so I wanted people to understand this election stands as it is at large, and it's the 2020 we're talking about, and that's the one that would be too close to for if we went the other way.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And because you would have to go through the election process after the 2018 general election, but before the 2020 general election, that's what puts you into a likely special election.
Okay, and I think Mr. Jansen has a question, and I think I do as well. But is there anybody, I don't have any cards, or anybody that wishes to speak on this issue or wishes to be heard? Doesn't appear so. Okay, so with that, Mr. Jansen?
Do you have a rough estimate on what a special election would cost? Not that I want to go that way, but just to let everybody know how much money would be coming out of the general fund to pay for something like that?
Sure. We have not consulted with the Registrar of Voters to get a specific number, and it changes from county to county, and it depends on your number of registered voters. Typically, what we see for the cost of a special election, depending on the size of the district, will be anywhere from $250,000, maybe a little less, $200,000, all the way up to anywhere in the $600,000 to $800,000 range, depending again on the number of registered voters and the local cost. If this could be done at a general election, if the request had been made for you to move to trustee areas early enough, you could have made it in this general election. The cost drops precipitously. It's usually $10,000 or $20,000 to add it to the general election ballot.
So I just have a couple of questions, and I think these are probably already been asked at some point, but I just want to clarify. So if you have a situation in trustee areas where no one seeks election and no one seeks appointment, does that seat just stay vacant at that point?
You know, the same is true for whether you have trustee areas or an at-large district. And we've had at-large districts that had a seat that they couldn't fill. It usually involves a lot of board outreach and trying to get people interested in running. Eventually, what happens if there's a vacancy and you don't fill that vacancy, what's supposed to happen under the education code is you have a special election to fill that, but if you have nobody to run it, it's rather difficult. I'm aware of at least one case where the county board stepped in and found somebody and appointed them, but that was really against, the district was not attempting to fill the vacancy, essentially. It had not made the effort to do so. So in theory, the seat could remain vacant, just like in theory in a general election district, it could remain vacant.
Okay. Another question I had, and I think we have a couple more questions here, is if, and I know this is a complicated process, I think, or at least it's complicated in my mind, but if this were a situation where the public in the district chose to vote on whether or not they wanted districts and they voted not to have districts, then in essence that would expose the district to liability, and it would be something that would be unwise, because it would, in essence, potentially we would be on the losing end of litigation again at that point.
That's correct. And there's actually precedent in the state where an entity of a city went through the election process. The voters voted down the move to trustee areas, and then a lawsuit was promptly filed, and it was settled by moving to trustee areas.
Okay. So essentially the public really doesn't have a voice in this.
And again, it's unusual because you're a school district, and the education code sections that I'm talking about predate the California Voting Rights Act, and really nobody's updated the education code to match the California Voting Rights Act.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Whitman and then Mrs. Stacy.
I think I'm just echoing Mr. Wynnham's statements here. If we did do an election, we would probably have to do it in June and hold our own special election, and I agree the cost would be $250,000 to $500,000 right out of our general fund. So that's not a good option. The other thing is, if we were to have the election and there is a reasonable probability that the voters would turn down going to districts, at least in my mind that probability exists, we would still be sued under the California Voting Rights Act the way it's set, and we would still end up probably having to go to districts. This is a terrible piece of legislation for our district, for cities, for any other types of districts in the state. And yet the state legislature refuses to deal with it because they say that dealing with it would appear racist to them.
Mrs. Stacy? No? Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? No? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.